We're going to bring in Marc Ambinder and John Dickerson, two of the best. On Mondays, John, we always talk about the week ahead in politics. We had a fairly busy weekend. We had a very interesting week last week. So what's ahead?
Well, what's ahead for the president is he's going to be in Des Moines, Iowa. He's going to be in Madison, Wisconsin. They're going to have a big rally at a college there, and then they're going to send it out to colleges all over the country in an attempt to get the president to try and turn out the base in the Democratic Party. And he will make a new case. He's made a lot of different ones over the last many months about why Democrats should be elected. But he's going to go back to that enthusiasm he created in 2008 and try and find it again, rub together whatever he can to rekindle some kind of energy inside the Democratic base.
Is that really possible, Mark? Because as we've seen, I mean, even President Clinton admitted it on Face the Nation the other day, the president sort of lost his groove there for a while. Now, he says he thinks he's getting it back, but he's having a really hard time out there.
And the people who are most affected by this recession, by this downturn, are the people who he turned out for the first time in 2008. Younger voters, recent college graduates who are having a devil of a time getting a job, having to move back in with their parents, having to stay in extended stay hotels. You could call them Obamavilles. There's so many young people who are qualified for just don't have jobs. The disaffection is not simply, well, Obama promised didn't do that. They're living reality on a daily basis now. That's quite different than what they were living a few years ago. So it's going to be tough, not just from a enthusiasm perspective, but to really change their minds that the country is on a direction that's different. So
where do you see this presidency going, Arianna? Can he get his groove back?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with John and Mark, and this is really the president's constituency. This enthusiasm gap is very real, and I think there are two ways that he can get his groove back. One of them is to bring that sense of urgency to what's happening and change personnel, which he's beginning to do, because while Larry Summers was in charge of economic policy, it was going to be very hard to make the middle class his North Star, which is what David Plouffe claimed was the case during the campaign. But the other thing is, remember, during the campaign, he really appealed to the better angels of our nature. He appealed to this call to service. He appealed to what we can do. You remember he kept saying, this is not just about me, this is about what we can all do together. And that rhetoric is gone. He needs to bring it back because this is not costing any money. The call to service is deficit neutral. So he needs to use that again and again, and he is uniquely able to do that. He's very articulate, very eloquent and inspiring, but he hasn't really used that.
Do you think, both of you, a question to both of you, that the president really tried to give the country in the beginning, asked it to swallow more than it could digest at one point? We had this enormous economic problem that Arianna talks about in her book. He tried to attack that and at the same time presented this health care proposal. Do you think in retrospect he might have been better off had he put off the health care, or at least part of it, until he had made more of an attack on the economic situation?
In retrospect, that seems to be the case. You know, what they thought was, and at the time when you talked to them, they spent the first 4 months talking about the economy, and they thought, okay, we've done what we need to do, and it's going to work. By January and February of the election year, it's going to be kicking in. We will start being able to go out there and say, all these great things have happened. They just misread the economy. And so, thinking things were going to be better, they thought, okay, well, now we can begin this thing we promised, and it'll be fine to go forward with this because we'll be able to claim that credit on the economy. So they just fundamentally misread where the country would be.
What do you think,
In
Marc?
doing their best not to let their agenda be overtaken by events, they became overtaken by events.
Right.
And I think that is in many ways responsible for what appears to be the drift in aim of the administration. They did do a lot, though, but they did it in ways that made the final product a lot less satisfactory than it might have been.
It's really what Lloyd George said, that you cannot jump across a chasm in two leaps. So like the stimulus bill wasn't big enough, the healthcare bill isn't going to really kick in until 2014. So the solutions were inadequate to the magnitude of the problems. And as a result, the other side can easily demonize them and say that they were in fact the problem.
You know, one of the things that the president talked about today on the Today Show in an interview with Matt Lauer was education, which is an area where I think we all agree we're not doing as well as we should, but nobody seems to know how to make it much better than it is, or at least not much has happened on that front. The president got asked a very interesting question by Matt Lauer this morning. He said, do you think he said, did Sasha and Malia get a better education, and are they getting a better education in private schools than they would if they had gone to public schools in the district here? And here's what the president said.
Thanks for the question, Kelly, and I'll be blunt with you. The answer is no right now. The D.C. Public school systems are struggling. Now, they have made some important strides over the last several years to move in the direction of reform. Right. There are some terrific individual schools in the D.C. system. And that's true, by the way, in every city across the country. In my hometown of Chicago, there are some great public schools that are on par with any private school in the country. But it goes to the point Matt and I were talking about earlier. A lot of times you've got to test in, or it's a lottery pick for you to be able to get into those schools. And so those options are not available for enough children. I'll be very honest with you. Given my position, if I wanted to find a great public school for Malia and Sasha to be in, we could probably maneuver to do it. But the broader problem is for a mom or a dad who are working hard but don't have a bunch of connections, don't have a lot of choice in terms of where they live. Right. They should be getting the same quality education for their kids as anybody else. And we don't have that yet.
So there you have it, and that seems to be the big problem in America. I think everybody agrees on that. The president has launched his program that's going to funnel a lot of federal money into some schools, but it's not into other schools. So what's the answer to education, Arianna?
Well, first of all, Bob, this is really the best thing happening at the moment in this country. Everything is coming together. I think it's the president's best initiative, the race to the top. The movie Waiting for Superman, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's powerful, it's moving, it's inspiring. Mark Zuckerberg giving $100 million to the New York public schools, which shows like a scaled up commitment by the private sector. This could really be a beyond left and right moment, where we could really have that tipping point we've been waiting for, and where you see many liberals taking on the teachers' unions, and you see many conservatives being willing to acknowledge that the education is the gateway opportunity to the American dream, and we cannot afford to continue to have a third of our children dropping out.
Quickly, guys.
In some ways it's like the Middle East peace talks of American politics. The grand bargain in outline we see, which is we have to make the teaching profession much more attractive and find ways to reward good teachers. The single fundamental most, if you have a good teacher in the classroom, the chances are the kid is going to get a good education. Figuring out how to do that is tough. The relationship to watch is President Obama and the head of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, very, very savvy, and she understands what's going on. She's struggling within her own union to reform, but she also acknowledges the reality. But I agree with Arianna. Everything seems to be coming together in a unique way, even with Republicans perhaps in control of the House. This is something that could get done.
What Waiting for Superman, the point they make is that there is a chapter 5 to the education problem. As in Arianna's book, there are solutions. We now know what they are. And if we all focus on them, we sort of agree on what they are. There's so many problems where everybody's fussing around and can't find a solution. There is an actual solution to the education problem. People are focused on it. That's actually, as bad as things are, a pretty good path to be on for an intractable issue like this.
It all goes back to the fact that for so many years in this country, we got very good teachers, and we didn't have to pay them anything, because in those days, women, there was no other place they could work except be a nurse. And then when other jobs opened up for women and salaries went up, they pursued the higher salaries many times. We're only now coming to focus on that. If we're going to have good teachers, we're going to have to pay them. That's one of the things we're going to have to do. And
figure out how to get rid of bad teachers.
And figure out how to get rid of bad teachers.
So
and that is key. That is key, because the data are stunning. When you have 1 in 2,500 teachers loses his or her job based on bad performance, compared to 1 in 55 doctors and 1 in 65 lawyers. I mean, that obviously doesn't make any sense.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you all very much for a really good discussion.